I was supposed to be at a study group that Saturday, not standing at the edge of a marina watching my father kiss a woman who wasn't my mother. But plans change, and sometimes they change everything else along with them. My name is Josephine. I'm 22, and for 19 years I believed my parents had the kind of marriage worth waiting for one day myself. If this story hits close to home, stay till the end, and maybe hit like and subscribe. There's more like this waiting here. My parents, Robert and Carol, had been married for 26 years. My father was a marine contractor who spent long hours at the docks, and growing up, I never once questioned why. He came home tired most nights, sure, but he also came home. He coached my softball team through middle school, drove 3 hours each way for my college move-in day, called my mother the best decision I ever made at every anniversary dinner I can remember attending. I genuinely thought I understood their marriage completely. That Saturday, my study group got canceled last minute, and instead of driving straight back to my apartment, I decided to surprise my dad at the marina where he sometimes worked weekends, thinking we could grab lunch together like we occasionally did when both our schedules aligned. I saw him before he saw me. He was standing near one of the smaller boats, not the work boats he usually serviced, but a sleek white one I didn't recognize at all. A woman was beside him, maybe in her 40s, laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting comfortably on his arm in a way that made something cold settle immediately in my stomach. I told myself for maybe 3 or 4 seconds that this was nothing. A coworker, a client, some entirely reasonable explanation my mind was already scrambling to construct before I'd even seen enough to actually need one. And then he kissed her. Not a quick, accidental kind of kiss. A slow, familiar one, the kind that comes from repetition, from comfort, from time spent building something neither of them was rushing through. I don't remember deciding to hide. I just remember suddenly finding myself behind a stack of empty crates near the dock office, my heart pounding so violently I was terrified they'd somehow hear it from 20 feet away. I watched my father, a man I'd spent my entire life believing was fundamentally good, wrap his arms around a stranger with the same easy familiarity I'd only ever seen him show my mother. I don't know how long I stood there, long enough to watch them board that white boat together. Long enough to see him laugh in a way that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone I didn't fully know anymore. I drove home in complete silence, no radio, no phone calls, nothing but the sound of my own breathing and a slowly building wave of nausea I couldn't fully explain even to myself. By the time I reached my apartment, I was shaking so badly I had to sit in my car in the parking lot for almost 20 minutes before I trusted myself to walk inside without collapsing. I didn't tell my mother immediately. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters to the rest of this story. I spent almost 3 weeks carrying that secret entirely alone, terrified of what saying it out loud might destroy, terrified of becoming the daughter who shattered her own family with a single sentence. I started watching my father more carefully during that time, the way you watch someone once you've seen something you can't unsee. I noticed things I'd apparently trained myself not to notice before. The way he'd occasionally step outside to take calls he used to just answer at the dinner table. The way certain weekends had quietly become unavailable for family things over the past year or so, always explained away with work emergencies that somehow never came with clear details attached. The guilt of knowing and staying silent eventually became heavier than the fear of what speaking up might cause. I drove to my parents' house on a Sunday afternoon, my mother alone in the kitchen, my father conveniently at the marina again, and I told her everything I'd seen, my voice shaking through every single word. I expected shock. I expected devastation, tears, immediate collapse. What I got instead was something far more heartbreaking. A slow, exhausted nod, like she'd been quietly waiting years for someone else to finally say out loud what she'd already suspected privately for a long time. "Her name is Diane," my mother said quietly, not even looking particularly surprised. "I've known for about 8 months." I sat there stunned, completely unprepared for the idea that my mother had already been carrying the same devastating knowledge in silence, apparently longer and more painfully than I had. "You knew," I asked.
My voice barely above a whisper. Mom, why didn't you say anything? Why are you still here? She was quiet for a long moment,
staring down at her hands in a way that told me she'd rehearsed this explanation privately many times before ever needing to say it out loud to someone else. 26 years, Josephine. I kept trying to find a version of confronting it that didn't end with losing absolutely everything I've built my entire adult life around. I kept hoping it would end on its own, that he'd choose us again the way he always used to. That's not fair to you, I said, tears finally breaking through, both for her and for myself. For the entire childhood, I suddenly wasn't certain I understood correctly anymore. You deserve so much more than quietly waiting for him to choose you. My mother reached for my hand, her own eyes finally filling with tears she'd apparently been holding back for months, maybe longer. I know that now, she said. I think I've known it for a while. I just wasn't ready to blow up everything until I had to be ready. We sat together at that kitchen table for hours, finally being completely honest with each other in ways our family had apparently never quite managed before that devastating Sunday afternoon. My mother told me things I hadn't known, small changes over the past year, a version of my father who'd grown distant in ways she'd initially attributed to work stress before eventually recognizing the pattern for what it actually was. My father came home around 6 that evening to find both of us waiting at that kitchen table, and I watched something collapse in his expression the moment he understood what conversation he'd unknowingly walked directly into. "Josephine saw you at the Marina," my mother said simply, her voice steadier than I expected. "With Diane." The color drained from his face immediately. He didn't try to deny it, which somehow felt like its own small mercy in an otherwise devastating conversation. He sat down heavily across from us, and for the first time in my entire life, I watched my father cry, real, overwhelmed tears, apologizing repeatedly to both of us in a way that felt both genuine and completely insufficient for the size of what he'd broken. "How long?" my mother finally asked, the question I could tell she'd needed answered for months but never quite found the strength to ask directly. "1.5 years," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I never meant for it to go this far. I don't even fully understand how it did." I left my parents' house that night, unable to fully process everything that had unfolded in a single devastating afternoon. My mother asked him to leave that same evening, calmly, without the screaming match I'd somehow expected. 26 years apparently doesn't end with dramatic shouting. Sometimes it just ends with quiet, exhausted finality. The months that followed were difficult for our entire family in different ways. My mother struggled with a grief that seemed to arrive in unpredictable waves. Some days functioning normally, other days barely able to get out of bed. I struggled with an anger toward my father I genuinely didn't know how to fully process, complicated further by memories of him as a genuinely loving father throughout my entire childhood. Memories that suddenly existed uncomfortably alongside this devastating betrayal. My father moved out permanently within a month, eventually into an apartment near the Marina, though as far as I know, whatever relationship existed with Diane didn't survive much longer past the divorce finalizing. I think, in some strange way, the affair required the secrecy to sustain whatever it actually was. And once everything became painfully public, whatever they'd built together simply couldn't hold up under that same exposure. My relationship with my father remains complicated, even now, almost a year later. We talk, occasionally, careful conversations that never quite return to the easy warmth we once shared without effort. I don't know if that warmth will ever fully return, or if some betrayals simply reshape a relationship permanently into something smaller and more cautious than what existed before. My mother, surprisingly, has found a kind of quiet strength I don't think I fully appreciated in her before all of this happened. She started taking pottery classes, reconnected with friends she'd unintentionally drifted from during years of increasingly isolated marriage, slowly built a version of her own life that exists entirely separate from my father for the first time in over 2 decades. "I spent so many years being someone's wife," she told me recently, working clay on a pottery wheel with a focus I'd genuinely never seen from her before. I forgot, somewhere along the way, how to just be myself. I think about that Saturday at the Marina often, the accidental discovery that changed absolutely everything about how I understood my own family. I used to believe secrets like that one only destroy things. I understand now they can also eventually painfully create space for something more honest to finally exist in their place.